The latest psychological operation, or Psy-Op, to cross America's cell phone screens is, of course, the shooting death of one Renee Nicole Good. The 37-year-old mother of three was shot in the face at point-blank range by a masked ICE agent in Minneapolis, dying at the scene. Now, putting aside the particulars of this episode, which aren't entirely known based on the limited footage we've been allowed to see, it would seem that the ruling class is using it to, once again, get a point across to the general public. Several points, in fact, of which we'll briefly examine here. Before beginning, it's important to remember that the entire purpose of the so-called mainstream news media is not to inform us, but rather to keep us indoctrinated, to spread propaganda, or otherwise brainwash the viewer. To put it even more bluntly, news exists to sell a narrative whose ultimate purpose is to tell us what government wants or expects from us. And they wouldn't be telling us about the formerly unknown Renee Good unless they wanted to use her death as a springboard for propaganda messaging. Having said that, let's jump right into what we do know about this case and what it likely portends for the immediate future. Now, as is true for virtually all psyops or government-sponsored narratives, one of the main reasons for putting out the Renee Good story is to keep Americans divided. Now, this is a key feature of virtually all so-called news stories, and it allows the ruling class to maintain their control over us. After all, a divided and distracted nation is far easier to govern and control than a unified and focused one. Already, this psyop has sparked nationwide division in the form of street protests, online fighting, and partisan ranting by members of both major political parties. It cannot be stressed enough just how imperative it is for the government to keep us divided in order to increase their control over us. Now, the emotionally charged Renee Good story is emphatically succeeding in that aim. A second apparent reason for this narrative is to maintain the ongoing psychological tension that has been fairly constant since the last major psyop was launched in 2020. The strain on the typical American wage earner has been augmented by persistently rising living costs, higher crime rates, and social dysfunction in the major cities. And further contributing to this, of course, is the politicization of everything and the growing intrusion of government in virtually every aspect of our lives. On this latter front, with virtually every major news story today taking on an emotionally driven political aspect, it's easy to see how the Renee Good story has created such a big reaction across the left-right divide, with protests springing up everywhere in the days since her death. Now, the third reason, I think, for the media's pushing of this narrative is the constant need for government to gauge its current level of support among the people. In his book, The Collapse of Complex Societies, Joseph Tainter pointed out that a study of anthropology reveals there is a minimum critical threshold of moral support below which no government can survive. Now, in the United States, that minimum threshold of support is typically gauged through the act of voting. But occasionally, the powers that be find it necessary to gauge support among the public by launching a psyop narrative to discern what percentage of Americans still support the basic structure of the federal government. The current Renee Good psyop has revealed to them that support on both sides of the political aisle remains fairly strong, with Democrats taking to the streets in protest of the Fed's treatment of the late Miss Good, which amounts to a petitioning of the government for redress of grievances. Now, that in itself constitutes support, since it recognizes the government's legitimacy to adjudicate. As for the Republicans, well, they're mostly lining up in support of the ICE agency and its decision to execute unwarranted violence upon an innocent victim who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Therefore, we can say that on both sides of the political spectrum, support for government remains strong. A final point worth mentioning here is the likelihood that the Renee Good narrative was designed in part to drive home the government's right to demand papers, please, in Soviet parlance. It could be that the image seared into America's conscience through the shooting scene that has been replayed across media ad infinitum in recent days will serve as a type of pre-propaganda for a coming day when Soviet-style federal checkpoints will be set up in towns and cities across the country. And from that perspective, the treatment of Renee Good at the hands of ICE agents may well serve as a chilling warning to everyone of what will happen to them if they refuse to comply with government's orders. This is South Bay. Thanks for listening.